Howdy, folks. Well, before we dive into things, I'd like to thank you all for coming out here tonight. And also a very special thank you to Silas House for coming to speak to us. Maybe you had to come here for a class, maybe you wanted to come, maybe you saw the free food, stumbled in, and decided to stay. I can't blame you. But no matter why you're here, you're stuck with us now. But we're very glad to have you. Appalachian State is sort of known for fostering organizations that promote the arts, which is a quality that's inseparable from the region itself. Here in the high country, we're faced with the juxtaposition of, far enough away from that? Good? Okay. Sorry. We're faced with this juxtaposition of idyllic scenery and a history of impoverished hardships. And I think that's really what helps to engender the rich literary tradition we have up here. It's, much like art, life in the high country is sobering and intoxicating at the self-same time. And that's what we're here to celebrate tonight. But you've heard enough from me. So, I'd like to turn things over to our first speaker, Lauren Himpen. Lauren is a senior creative writing major with a sociology minor and learning studies minor in leadership minor. So, take it away.
Thank you so much. Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming. I'm here because, oh gosh, I feel so loud. I'm here because Appalachian has meant a lot to me throughout my 4 years here. And one of the most significant things happened to me here, and that's falling in love. Don't tell my dad. And I also went through my first heartbreak. Oh no. I don't know, it went out. Do you want me to keep talking? Am I good? Okay, we're good. I went through my first heartbreak at Appalachian, and these poems are a collection and essentially a journey of myself as I went through this really significant time in my life, and I hope it gives some of you some insight into what it's like to fall in love in Appalachian. Part 1. Sparkling fingertips, his juicy stare. I loved the way my palms found the scars on his back like magnets. He was so afraid. I was too. Too afraid to admit how sticky and delicious a steering wheel felt on that summer morning. He drove me into the Blue Ridge Mountains, pulled over deep beyond the paved roads, which was fitting considering I had forgotten where I was since he moved a piece of my hair to look closer into my eyes. He got out of the car, held my sandwich in one hand, my hand in the other, led me through honeysuckles and maidenhair ferns to the top of a cliff. We ate lunch there, staring out into the hills, the expanse of everything, then stopping to notice the ants pocketing our breadcrumbs, because isn't that what falling in love is? Feeling the expanse of everything, the constant reminder that real love is found in the bubbles of his laughter, his blurry morning face, that freckle behind his right ear. Love is a vast specificity. Part 2. Splice is what linguists call an auto-antonym. Definitions of the word contradict themselves. To piece together, to cut apart. Meaning the boy spliced my heart. I bet you're wondering which definition I mean. I'm not sure I know the answer. He spliced through the crowd at the party, like barns do on the horizons of Illinois. I knew exactly where I was going, crashing forward. I spliced words he spilled into my hands and glass of water half full eyes. I saw what he meant when he said, "I'm not afraid of anything," but still he shook in his sleep. Sometimes I think the snow spliced us. Had that day been sunny and dry, not dripping with slush, socks damp and my winter boots, maybe then I would not have finally spliced my sandy, only to splice his heart. These words are sometimes called Janus words, named after the Roman god who presided over beginnings, endings, doors, and gates. He is always seen with two faces, one looking to the past, one to the future. I wonder which one he likes better. I can still pick out his voice in the crowd, used to make my knees buckle, connected like a finished puzzle piece pointing right towards him. Now they buckle like break when I recognize his whiskey burn echo enter the room. You know, it's not always the sad kind. There were crumbs on my path he, Hansel, and Gretel picked up and turned into chocolate chip cookies. There were pebbles he threw at my window, much too late in the evening, but he collected them one by one and built statues in my bedroom. Two faces, always looking right past the other. Past and future, prologues and epilogues, the first frost of the season and the summer solstice. I lined all his creations up against my bedroom door, hoping he would remember the trick to getting inside. I think the fog of remembering heartaches is in these contronyms, these words that are their own opposites. Memories look at themselves in the mirror, unsure which part to pucker at, which part to like, cover up, make brighter. I don't think he realizes it, but someday I know his heart will be spliced again by someone else or by time, the only thing that promises to go on. I know mine has most days. I keep his chocolate chip cookies in the freezer when I'm writing poems like this and need a little crumb of him to sprinkle in. Statues of his dizzy phone calls, though they have collected dust, I see the way they still shine in the starlight of remembering. These synapses have weathered a whole world of moving from one juxtaposition to the other. I can't tell if they've stayed the same, withstood the winds, or if they've worn away all the details I can't remember anymore. The boy spliced my heart, one way or another. Part 3. The morning rolled in, blurry with summer fog and my glasses on his nightstand. I feel his eyes open and breath shift as we both remember that yesterday is not today and tomorrow turned into right now. He tried to piece together the see you later, or rather, I wish you didn't see right through me. And there I am, knocking on his hollow rind, whispering, were you really there, or was it only the eyelashes from the ghost of you? But the only thing that came out was good morning. Even these words were too opaque, muddied the rainwater goodbyes that clung to his windows. When I got into my car, still numb from Sweet Tea I Love Yous and Louis Armstrong's trumpet that followed our every slow dance, he closed the door behind me, knowing we both were continents away even before I turned the ignition. And much quicker than I anticipated, the sunrise changed from watermelon pink to Honeycrisp apples. Fall was circles on circles. The season told me every lesson I pretended not to hear. Grasping at leaves as if raking them into piles is enough to fuel us through winter. Sure, there are tales and poems about beauty and the dying and ending, but I'm tired of saying but. I'm tired of asking music to please stop making me cry. I'm tired of wishing away memories like dandelion seeds, folding them neatly into boxes labeled with his name written next to fragile. So I'll lay them out onto the lawn, let memories freckle in the sunshine just like he used to. I'll keep saying thank you when that tree we kissed under smiles back at me. She has grown so tall since that summer. Thank you.
Next speaker is someone I've known for, God, I think 19 years. It's me. So I'll be reading a, thank you. I'll be reading a piece of short fiction that was actually mostly written in Dr. Richards' class. It sort of feels like a rejected Tom Waits B-side to me. Pardon my French in advance. But here is the Blood Moon Blues. By the time the moon started to bleed, my head was trapped in a nicotine cloud, thanks to the grace of God or the trickery of Satan. My vacation lined up with what the computer-age shamans called a super wolf blood moon eclipse. Considering the noises hammering from the bathroom every time I try to relieve myself, I'm thinking I owe my thanks to the cloven-hoofed man downstairs. Inside, the party roars with the popping of champagne and slurred introductions nobody will remember by daylight. Joining this little eclipse shindig wasn't my first pick. But my lawyer said releasing a pack of wolves in the downtown Greensboro and blaming it on the moon is a felony. So here I am, smoking on the porch of my friend's house, hoping that all those evangelicals would be right about the blood moon heralding the apocalypse. A parade was starting to stroll down Elm, piping away the tune of When the Saints Go Marching In. Flask in hand, I saluted melancholic memory with a swig of bourbon. Years ago, I waltzed around New Orleans with Ash to that same song, dreaming of a moonlight proposal. Back then, she was happy to join a madcap writer on his vulgar ventures. How many years had it been? I knocked the ash off my cigarette and brought it back to my cracked lips. By the time I pulled out another stag, the twinkling gulfs of the night had peeled back the moon's alabaster skin, exposing the carmine beneath. In a way, it's the prettiest night I've ever seen. Somehow, it was lovelier than the day Ash left me. That day I sat in the park wishing I could cry as spring's beauty mocked me. The air was cool, and though the ground was dry, it smelled like rain. It's easier if you could be mad at somebody, anybody. Who could blame her? It started! Some prick shouted from inside the party, waving his drink around before grabbing my shoulder and spitting in my face as he asked, "Can you see it?" I'm colorblind. I puffed the cloud into his face as the partiers encroached on my miserable parade. My smoky armor wasn't enough to protect me, and soon enough I was surrounded by wasted suburbanites who, 3 minutes prior, had been dry humping like a bunch of goddamn teenagers. Can't help but wonder if these self-medicated soccer moms and dads were hoping the apocalyptic moon would save them from the metropolitan hellscape we call home. Ash hated parties like this, people smiling over their drinks, talking to the person in front of them, though they were more invested in the conversation behind them. Din's duplicity, she called them. We ditched every party within an hour and headed to a pub. When the pubs kicked us out, we drive to the overlook and marvel at the moon. The moon, still bleeding, became the target of 20 fluttering digital shutters. Pity they were too stupid to know the moon refuses to be trapped in a snapshot, even when wounded. Partiers got bored within 5 minutes and continued to train their livers for a marathon detox. Any other night, I'd be there with them, but for the first time I can remember, the cruel universe is finally bleeding, and it's beautiful. Din's a duplicity. Sometimes I wonder if that's what she thought as she walked away. My skin could be against hers, my heart being in cadence with her own, but she always understood I wasn't there. I was next to her. She was too smart not to know my soul would always be between words printed on a page. The moon knows it, I know it, she knows it. A secret kept between the three of us. Somewhere in this godforsaken city, Ash is looking up at the moon, sipping French champagne while cuddled next to her husband, happy to have forgotten our eccentric evenings. Does her husband read in my books? A stream of smoke leaves my nose and flits up to the sky like a sullen prayer. Beneath this misanthropic moon, does she understand? Will she see a beauty in the bleakness and the splendor of the bleeding moon? What good is art if it affords you intimacy with those you never meet, but not your lover? The red disk that was the moon had become but a crescent, as lunar flesh regained its pallid complexion. I bit through my cigarette, ground my teeth against the soggy paper. How dare the moon heal itself? How dare it promise me nightmares and then leave me with mocking dreams? Come on in, Foster. It's too damn cold out here. The voice belonged to the host, Jose Walls. Walls is a college buddy. One man at the party who doesn't make chain smoking sound like a good idea. Hey, Walls, how loud do you think it is in there? Loud enough that I'll get a noise complaint. Loud enough to mask gunshots? What? I trained my pistol on the moon and fired off 3 leaden complaints against the cosmos. What the fuck, Foster? Give it a try. I'll feel better. Walls fired off 4 more grievances at the recovering moon and passed the piece back to me, smiling. Hell of a party, Walls. And that's that. So, next up, we have Jay Butler. Jay graduated in December, yes? Graduated in December with a degree in creative writing and history, and he will be applying to graduate school for an MFA program. Take it away, Jay.
I want him to read my poems. Like, what a great voice. All right, anyway. The Escape Artist. After swallowing stones he holds in his gut, the artist sinks into the bottom of a steel cage, submerged in a glass box of water. After minutes of flailing and writhing, he finally wriggles his arms free from a straitjacket in a frenzy of bubbles. Leaping out in a splash, he begins juggling bowling pins coated in kerosene, posed by an open suitcase dotted with dollars and coins outside that big bank on First Street. His longtime assistant slides a saber down his throat, no problem. A child introduces nuance and naivete to the display. She simply asks how and why. The artist's face scrunches up. He thinks a minute. He replies, "Don't bother me, kid. I'm condemned to chase freedom. I've danced on the steel skeletons of skyscrapers. I've chanced my life on curbs, dependent on passers-by. It's magnetic. No wires, no smoke and mirrors, only an archaic drawl. Long story short, I do it because I have to." So that was a character poem, sometimes referred to as persona poetry, where one essentially adopts a different point of view or a character other than oneself. And I find a really intriguing thing about these kind of poems is that you discover something about yourself, even though you're not writing about yourself per se. The character in the poem is obviously struggling, but continues doing what they love, which is something hopefully a lot of us can relate to. I often think of poetry as an act of discovery, whether you're writing it or reading it. You're discovering new ways of thinking, new ways of viewing the world through language. Loosely quoting one of my favorite poets, Yusef Komanyaka, one should never write to perfect a voice, but to discover a voice. So it's a way of discovering, but also a way of recovering. You can view it as a recovery of the past, or a recovery of something in the present, which leads me to this next poem where the main idea is the past always, constantly has an effect on the present. Magnolia. Willows weep over friends and family enjoying the Magnolia Plantation petting zoo. After paying for tickets, we feed whitetails and box turtles, gawk at peacocks. A keeper frightens a fox into a cage. We wander into a decrepit garden. Cracked flagstone squares off plots of weeds. Millipedes crawl along the blank gaze of a stone cherub's eyes. Camellias and azaleas drip tears of dew, and Spanish moss drapes over live oak. A plaque in front of a rebuilt stone schoolhouse reads, "Reverend Drayton often called his students black roses." We stroll over to the Ashley River, choking on humidity as a foggy haze creeps up. I can almost see the bobolinks form clouds rising over the dikes, hear the silence rippled by whips and rifles, like the cracking back of rice culture. I can almost hear cannons, smell the odor of blood and gunpowder. I can almost behold the Reverend working on a sermon, perched there on his pine bench by the river like a barred owl. A one-man congregation listens to nothing. He whispers something to himself, reverberated in a heron's call. This next poem, this last one, I'm not sure if there's a technical term for it, but I call it a mosaic poem, where essentially each stanza could stand on its own. It's quatrains, so 4-line stanzas. But each stanza is connected through a specific motif. In this instance, the motif is flowers. So, there's a subheading, and the subheadings connect the whole thing to make one poem out of many, like a mosaic. Buds. Iris. The calico's eyes bloom blue-green in the windowsill, lit up like alchemical gold. Sunflower. Towering over wired archways as guardians of hoop houses, they offer their bodies for butter, oil, lotion, bird feed, or biodiesel. Poppy. Armistice and remembrance. Women who caught whiffs of independence in a San Franciscan back alleyway. Morning glory. Unopened spirals ooze dewdrops, showing up right on time, donning periwinkle flare. Azaleas. Fancying shade near or under trees, or inflamed in one of Sylvia's poems, every spring, Gran plucked a few, propped them in green jars on the dinner table. Red buds. Under the Japanese red maple, the red-headed tykes played in the yard. Under and around the dogwood, the red-headed tykes played with each other. Mums. Nothing satisfies the urge like pinching a seed pod in between index and baby thumb in budding memories. Chrysanthemums. These fireworks spread across dusk, blooming under moonlight in shimmering monkey grass, hopefully wet enough to prevent a fire. Dahlia. Their diameter ranges from Spanish thimble to Aztec dinner plate. Bright rays glow spirals from a gaping mouth of pink teeth like the gaseous jaws of stars. Thank you.
All right. So, now for a change of tune, I'd like to introduce y'all to Anna Muckenfuss, who will be presenting what I believe to be the cross between journalism and myth-making. Is that
Storytelling?
Storytelling. So, with that, huff, puff, and blow us all away, Anna.
Just so you all aren't confused, I'm going to be talking about the Three Little Pigs later. Yeah, just so you know. As Michael said, my name is Anna Muckenfuss. I am a journalism and broadcasting major. I am a junior. And tonight I would like to share with you why I believe journalism is storytelling. So I'd like to start out with, well, pretty much talking about a journalist's job. It is a journalist's job to tell stories. Journalists are storytellers, but not in the traditional way you may think. Journalism is an informative type of storytelling. Sometimes it can only be used to inform, other times it can be used to influence. Journalism is storytelling to reach a wide audience before any other forms of entertainment like movies or TV shows. So I'd like to share a little bit about my experience. I am the video editor for the Appalachian newspaper, and I am also a news anchor for the Appalachian Weekly News. So I've got a lot on my plate, but as a journalist, I have been lucky to be able to tell the stories of the Boone community for the past 3 years. One story that has stuck with me for a while is a story that I wrote in October of last year. And this subject may be a little sensitive for some people, so I would like to present a warning beforehand. Last year, some frat brothers from Alpha Epsilon Pi, our Jewish frat, discovered some hateful graffiti in one of the expression tunnels. When writing this article, I wanted to change the angle of the story, which means I didn't want to just focus on what happened and the discovery of the graffiti. I wanted to write about how students, faculty, and people in the Boone community reacted to what happened and what they wanted to do about it. So I got in touch with Kobe Ellick, who at the time was president of Alpha Epsilon Pi. My interview with Ellick will stay with me for the rest of my life because of how he wanted to encourage other people to be positive when there is hate, but also to speak up when there is wrongdoing. So just quoting from the article, "Other people around you will hear you and follow your lead. Whether you think that there is no one around you in a school of 20,000 people, someone will speak up, someone will follow you, and someone will listen. Our response to this hatred needs to be organized, and it needs to be as one. This needs to be all of us coming together as mountaineers to fight this hate." Now, I'm sure you all are wondering, what does this have to do with the Three Little Pigs? Well, I'm going to tell you. So I'd just like to go over the familiar fairy tale, The Three Little Pigs, real quick, just in case you've never heard it before. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs, and the time came for them to leave home and seek their fortunes. Before they left, their mother told them, "Whatever you do it the best that you can, because that's the way to get along in the world." The first little pig built his house out of straw because it was the easiest thing to do. The second little pig built his house out of sticks. This was a little bit stronger than the straw house. The third little pig built his house out of bricks. One night, the big bad wolf, who dearly loved to eat fat little piggies, came along and saw the first little pig in his house of straw. He said, let me in, little pig, or I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," said the little pig. But of course, the wolf did blow in the house and ate the first little pig. The wolf then came to the house of sticks. Let me in, little pig, or I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," said the little pig. But the wolf blew in that house too, and he ate the second little pig. The wolf then came to the house of bricks. Let me in, cried the wolf, "or I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," said the pig. Well, the wolf huffed and puffed, but he could not blow down that brick house. But the wolf was a sly old wolf, and he climbed up on the roof to look for a way into the brick house. The little pig saw the wolf climb up on the roof and lit a roaring fire in the fireplace and placed on it a large kettle of water. When the wolf finally found the hole in the chimney, he crawled down and splash right into the kettle of water. And that was the end of the troubles with the big bad wolf. And the pig lived happily ever after. Now let's revisit this story, but in a different way. A local wolf is in hot water after climbing down the chimney of a local home. The happily ever after sheriff's department report that the big bad wolf was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. At this time, the sheriff's department can confirm the victims were brothers, John and Joe Piggy. Little Boy Blue, a detective with the sheriff's department, said the investigation had determined the wolf followed the victims home and taunted them before blowing down their homes and eating them. The only reason he did not succeed the last time was because the house was made of brick, Blue said. Jay Piggy, the owner of the brick home, said he heard the wolf outside his front door. He shouted, let me in, Piggy said. I told him, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin. Piggy said his quick thinking helped save his life when the wolf started climbing up the roof of his home. I stuck the kettle on the fire and waited, Piggy said. It didn't take long for him to come down the chimney. Once he fell into the kettle, I slammed the lid shut and called the sheriff. Blue said the sheriff's department was able to make an easy arrest thanks to Piggy's brave efforts. The offender is in custody, Blue said. Thanks to Piggy, this story has a happily ever after. So my final thought I would like to leave you with is this. Now I know The 3 Little Pigs is not necessarily a scary story or something that is negative. But I would like to encourage you to find the positive in the negative stories that scare you, that anger you. When you find the positive, write the positive. Write about the people that are changing lives, helping those in need, and making the world a better place. By doing this, you can find your own happily ever after. Thank you very much.
And now for Jay Phillips. Jay Phillips is a creative writing major at the Watauga Residential College, and I believe she has poetry for us, yes? Marvelous.
Hi, everyone. So, coming to App has changed the mindset that I enter once I start writing. And what I found is that I can't lie to myself anymore when I write, which has made writing a difficult thing that I can't do as often, but I think it's improved the quality of what I'm able to do a lot, because if I can't shout my truth into the void like here, then when else am I going to be able to do it? So a lot of my poetry that I've written lately has been my honest confession about my mental health problems, namely OCD and bipolar disorder, both of which are recent diagnoses that I'm still trying to grapple with and understand. But thinking about that and putting something onto paper always helps me make sense of what I'm going through. So I have 2 poems related to those issues that I'm gonna read to you all. My partner is a rattlesnake of sorts. Now, I don't mean I'm dating a real life snake, or that he's a petty, betraying Taylor Swift, two-faced Gemini, mood ring you bought on vacation at Myrtle Beach, green with envy and jealousy kind of snake. And most definitely not that he's a serpentine Satan in the Garden of Eden, eat this apple, you know you want to kind of snake. But I do definitely mean that he's a Slytherin kind of snake, a sly, fun, sharp-witted trickster, cunning, slightly conniving, convincing liar when he wants to be. Probably not the kind to sink his fangs into my flesh, but has a chaotic, neutral personality nonetheless kind of snake. My partner is a rattlesnake of sorts, or at least he sounds like one. He won me over with the scent of soap and genuine decency, softness and worship, true virtues wrapped in chaos, brown eyes that somehow gleam red in the sunlight, and a gentle grip on my life and heart, which I happily accepted in return. And to him, I say, you are good to me. You are so, so good to me. You know, sometimes I think he underestimates just how much of his personality I take into consideration. He already knows I see every last thing he'd never think of hiding from me, on top of what he might want to bury. And what can I say? I don't always pry, but I do always worry, and I certainly watch. I see him shine and succeed every day. I see the people magnet his personality wields like a weapon. I see all the little beautiful things. I've seen friends vying for a single drop of his attention. I see every exact moment he buckles under the weight of the crown he gave himself. Moments when the embellishments left by friends and company on his regalia tip the scales too far. Now, this man, he loves statistics, numbers, details, intricacies, rhythms, and he analyzes these for fun. It never ceases to amaze me that he can make sense of it all. It never ceases to scare me that he rambles and ruminates over these until his mildly neurotic prattling starts sounding like the rattlesnake song I've heard in my own mind for years. And while his obsession isn't clinical at all for him, it is for me. And OCD will raise a red flag towards anything he does that reminds me of what I used to spend hours obsessing over. Statistics, numbers, details, intricacies, rhythms. And this is and will always be his most strong performance. So let's count to the beat of 1. I look at him once and I see a rattlesnake made of neuroses hissing and rattling absent-mindedly. 2, I look at him twice and my instincts choose flight. 3, I look at him 3 times and I see a mirror. 4, I panic. And to him, I say, I'll never be able to understand exactly why my paranoid Mary Jane-addled brain confused the way you passively snort with a rattlesnake that one time, or why I can't unsee it. I can't explain why I hyper-focus on your neuroticism endlessly, or why that was one of the first things I noticed about you and refused to let go of. I cannot explain that even though I love you deeply, your lips between mine won't soothe the anxiety, insisting on coursing up my spine. To him, I say, you've never done me wrong. You aren't perfect, but you're a gift, and you're so good to me. But the more of myself I see in him, the more I worry. Every joke, every essay littered with writing methods I don't need to teach and reteach anymore, every stolen turn of phrase, every tick, every system of thought, every time he uses his own neuroticism to understand my mind's nuclear meltdowns and decipher my silence with startling accuracy, I hope he knows I see it all and it scares me. And all I can think is I'm filthy, baby, because on some level I cannot believe someone like him could love somebody so heavy in the mind. I see myself in every single thing he does, and all I can think is you're too good to be like me. Please don't be like me. Cherry pick my good sides to take for yourself. All I know is I can't tell if the song's flowing from your mouth or of your design or mine. To him, I say you're too stubborn to become a carbon copy, but too unguarded to remain uncontaminated. You're in love. A small amount of vulnerability is the price you paid. And this is not a comfort. The little ways in which we absorb each other's personalities are alarming and beautiful, but for now, they are alarming first. And this is not a comfort, no matter how beautiful we make each other. To him, I say, I hope you can understand why I don't tell you why I panic as I do. And next time you try to comfort my anxious mind, don't tell me to think of you instead, because I already am. My partner sounds like a rattlesnake, and maybe someday the beauty of his songs will be the first thing I hear. So, that was the first. Thank you. All right, I've got one more for you. And this one is formatted as an open letter to the audience about how much I hate and enjoy being manic, because it's a lot of fun, but life is also not great when you don't have impulse control. So I thought I would write about that. Dear listener, I wish I could tell you that I care. Words are a delicacy. I'm a glutton, and I drank poor Miriam's bleeding pages dry. My guts are bursting with syllables and syntax, but I'd rather die of excess than feel the roar of want in my stomach. Again, compulsive desire is a storm. Fear makes my eyes flash with golden stars you don't want to see. Gold is foolish by nature, so is fear. Pyrite, greedy, gluttonous, gilded gold. Guild and guilt sound too similar to be anything less than siblings. Do you find me sensible yet, dear listener? I wish I could tell you I'm a trusting person. No matter how many times I consider opening up about the truth, restraint will always ring through my body like a bell striking 12. I have nothing to hide, but hide I will. I am not ready to bear my balefire yet. I'm sorry, my love. Pity is a scam. Optimism will kill you, snake eyes blazing. Validation is the middle ground. It should be. Put me in somebody else's shoes. Easy, it should be. I can feign empathy with a real smile, real sorrow, real joy. I am loved. Do you find me practical yet, dear listener? I wish I could tell you that I made it all up. My life is full of half-brewed truths and weakly flavored lies, but when I cast spells with pens and ink, it is neither. My garden grows full of baby's breath, foxglove, and mountain laurels, and that mixture of flowers, that chaos of petals, that is the taste which burns us all. So call me divine and hearken to my tale. Call me royalty and bow to my glow. I am sovereign. My crown is too heavy, and you will kneel and watch me wobble. I am heavenly. My halo is too heavy. Earthly pleasures outweigh my eternity, and I descended with bloody wings and a wine-soaked knife in my right hand. Do you find me noble yet, dear listener? I wish I could tell you that it ends well, but I am fortunate to derive satisfaction from my own life. And yet, I lie, I lie, I lie. I can't stop. You see, it never ends well. I will always tear down my own masterpieces before anybody else has a chance. And I pray this interaction won't end the same way. But I'm sorry, my love. Boredom is lethal. Let me tell you something about boredom. Boredom killed curiosity first, the cat second. Boredom drives thumbtacks into the veins on my arms. Boredom is what suggests I watch coppery fountains erupt from my own body. Boredom tells me to leave scarlet footprints behind in the shower. Do you find me alarming yet, dear listener? I wish I could say that you'll survive this, but you see, this was never about me. This is about what you decided, this is about what you need and decided you don't deserve. So enter the garden. The flowers are lethal. Brave cowards who dare to touch the petals will lock their starry eyes with gods and walk backwards into hell. You, the cowardly brave, enter my garden. Inhale my perfume. The flowers are killer. The buzz you're getting is self-love. Thank you.
Well, it's come to the time of the evening where I'd like to introduce you all to our keynote speaker, Silas House. Silas has not only been a best-selling author of six novels, and won Appalachian Book of the Year award, but he's a hell of a guy. So please welcome Silas House.
Hello, thank y'all. Can you hear me okay? I've been asked to speak to you for about 25 or 30 minutes, and I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about how I became a writer and why I became a writer, and what I hope to do in my writing. I want to thank you all for sharing your stories. It takes a lot of courage to stand up and tell your truth in front of your peers, and I would have been terrified to do that at your age, so thanks. So I've written a little essay just to tell you about my early writing, and I'll just launch right into it. From the time I was very little, I realized the power of words and music. For the longest time, that was all that country people like my family had. That's the way it was in my family, at least. I've always lived on stories. It's no wonder my people have forever known their value. The power of sentences, words, pauses. They exaggerated, embellished, added in new scenes with each telling. I was raised in a family that had been so poverty-stricken that they didn't have much more than their stories, the kind of poverty people always associate with being Appalachian. So they took their storytelling very seriously. When words are all you have, you learn to cherish them. You learn to roll them about on the palm of your hand, admire their beauty, their shine. In my family, in my place in the world, we knew that words could be used to fight back. On the rare occasions when we left the region and people made fun of the way we talked, which they always did, we knew how to defend ourselves by either telling them off or using our country charm to disarm them. But mostly words were used for the positive, to praise, to soothe, to heal, The very act of telling a story was the act of soothing or healing. The very act of collecting words in a beautiful way and then delivering them to others gathered about was a sort of praise service in that the words were being worshiped. We were a storytelling people, and we knew that stories are the things that sustain a people and a place. They're the first roots of a community. When I was a child, in our house, there was not much use in watching television because someone was bound to call or burst through the front door to tell a very long, breathless, complicated story they couldn't keep to themselves. That's the kind of community I lived in. The only show I ever remember my family watching without interruption was The Waltons. Do any of you know what The Waltons is? Well, it's a very famous TV show, a really positive portrayal of being Appalachian. And so it really appealed to my family. And we were able to watch it in peace because it was the only show that we knew, everybody we knew was watching it. So it was the only show that wouldn't be interrupted. For the most part, we listened to stories around our dining table or on the front porch, my parents and aunts and uncles and cousins and neighbors. And everyone I knew talked all the time. The people I knew growing up talked as if their lives depended on it. Now I see that in a way they did. My Granny May told old stories while she hoed the corn and beans or while she sat in her green rocker. My father talked from underneath the hood of the car, emerging with blackened, greasy arms long enough to finish his story. All my good uncles stood in a row, laughing, talking about their honky-tonk days. My preacher uncles talking low and serious about church. All they ever talked about was church. My girl cousins, Gina, Dina, Tina, sitting on the creek bank with their feet in the rushing waters of Laurel Fork, confiding in one another. My cousins Melanie and Barb, who hardly took a breath while they related some epic that happened at school that day. My best friend Donna making up things as she went along, adding in twists and turns whenever the notion struck her. There were all my aunts and my mother in the kitchen washing dishes, stories curving in and out and over top one another, all of them somehow making sense at the same time. Then a good song would come on the radio, and my mother and her sister would dance a little and sing, and I would love them so much I couldn't stand it. For the juicier stories, I would disappear into the shadowy corners of the living room. I would crawl up under the kitchen table or under the high front porch. I would do anything to eavesdrop. I was a glutton for secrets, and my family had plenty of them, plenty of stories. All their secrets have been shown their way into 6 of my novels now. Even then, I knew how lucky I was to grow up in such a place, to be surrounded by people who talked all the time, who laughed so loudly, who still knew the art of communication, storytelling. They were the energy that fueled my childhood. This is not to say that it was as romantic or as perfect as it might sound. Growing up in such close-knit culture can be smothering too, and I often felt suffocated and spied upon. Nothing escaped the eyes and ears of these people, and sometimes if they didn't know something for sure, they'd make it up just to tell a story. There was also poverty, but at the time I had no idea that most of the people I knew were poor. We all had plenty to eat after all. That was all that really mattered to me as a child. Almost everyone I knew and was kin to lived in trailers, but I didn't know for a while that people looked down upon us for that reason too. When I was in 7th grade, I had a favorite teacher, Miss Sandra Stidham, who wrote a quote on the blackboard by Eleanor Roosevelt. "No one can make you feel inferior without your own consent." I had already been taught that by my family, but seeing it spelled out in her neat hunchback cursive on the blackboard, seeing it written down in words really solidified it for me. Since I wanted to be a writer, since my idols were John Boy Walton and Harper Lee, in a time when all the other little boys idolized people like Larry Bird and Evel Knievel, who was a famous motorcyclist at the time, I knew the negative power of words too. While the other boys played football, I laid against a tree at the edge of the football field and read books like Where the Red Fern Grows or The Outsiders. While they followed their father's leads to be racist, even though they didn't know anybody who wasn't just like them, I teared up while I read To Kill a Mockingbird and realized that there were different kinds of people in the world. Books taught me that. Books and poetry and music. And I wasn't ashamed of it either. I became a young artist who announced himself in class as such. By the age of 12, I began to identify as a writer. This didn't go over well with those snarling boys and a few of the more scoffing girls, so they called me names. Since I was scrawny and they were all gigantic, I could only fight back so much before they pummeled me to death. So I fought back in my little black and white composition book. In my notebook, I could write anything I wanted to about them, and my anger would sizzle down my arm and out the tips of my fingers like light. The frustration becoming sentences that became paragraphs, that became scenes, and then I had created something. I began to write as if my life depended on it, and I never really stopped. But I was mostly writing about places I didn't really understand. Like I said, I had been introduced to Kill a Mockingbird, and I loved it, so I said everything in the Deep South for a long time, where it's Sept. I had never been further south than Gatlinburg until I was in college, and I only then went to Atlanta. That was as far south as I went, only because my uncle was in prison there. So I wrote in non-places. My sense of place didn't go beyond the room that a scene was set in, so that they felt like they were happening in vacuums. The reader wasn't able to place herself or feel like she was inhabiting the same space as my characters. I was a freshman in college, and I had a good friend in my math class who loved to read. In that math class, I spent most of my time writing stories, and she spent most of her time reading what I wrote. One night, she challenged me to write a story set where I was from, in eastern Kentucky, in the mountains, in Appalachia, in a small community mostly made up of people I was either kin to or had known my whole life, as if they were my family members. As soon as she challenged me to do that, I wrote the first line of what would be my first novel. The first line was, and it remained, they were in a car going over Buffalo Mountain, but the man driving was not Clay's father. Now, there are a lot of things that I wish I could change about that first novel, because no writer is really satisfied with their first book completely. But even now, I have to admit that that is a pretty kick-ass opening line. The reason why is because I had been in a car many, many times going over Buffalo Mountain. I knew that terrain. And lots of the people I knew, mostly my cousins, were people who often didn't have their father beside them, but men who were supposed to be in the place of their father, like their mother's boyfriends or new husbands. So right away, I was in a world that I knew well, and those two themes go on throughout the book. The issue of men who are good fathers, men who are not good fathers, men who disappear as fathers, and most of all, the issue of place. And all that's right in the first line. I knew right away that one thing I really wanted to do was take the reader to the Appalachia I knew, because most people don't understand Appalachia, although they think they do. I was really stunned when I went to college and began to encounter people from outside the region who had huge misconceptions about the place. They assumed, for example, that I only listened to bluegrass music, when in fact that's probably my least favorite kind of music. Sorry, no offense to any bluegrass musician in the room. I like it too, just not as much as other things. Instead, I was listening to everything, every kind of music. They assumed that I came from a place that didn't value artistry, but everyone in my family and my community had been encouraging me to be a writer since I was a child. People insulted me, really, what I always thought is that they were insulting my family. And I always thought of them, and they would come up before me when people had these assumptions about how simplistic they were. They assumed I came from a place that was not part of the modern world, but everyone I knew watched MTV and dressed in the latest styles and was updated on the news. They assumed I came from a place where nobody wore shoes, where I was the only one who could read and write. Most troubling to me, they assumed I came from a place that was simple. And there's nothing simple about Appalachia. If there was, there would be nothing to write about it. When I went to find books about my generation's experience in Appalachia, they just were not there. The closest I could get were the wonderful books of Lee Smith, but most of them were set in the past. And even if they were contemporary, they were not set from the point of view of my generation. So I just started writing the book that I wanted to read. And although I didn't know it at the time, I wrote the first novel about Generation X Appalachia. At least that's what the reviews said later. And as I understand it, you all are now Generation Z, I think, right? So that opening line I read to you earlier is from the prologue, and it's set in the mid-1970s. But this scene I'm going to read to you is the first chapter of the book, and it's set in the year 2000, just 1 year before the book was published. Clay slid his blackened coveralls down his legs, jerked them off, and tossed the hard clump of clothing into the back of the truck. Coal dust twinkled on the metal of the truck bed. He put his work boots back on and pulled off his t-shirt, sailing it through the window and onto the floorboard. Already his chest was glistening with the sweat of July sun. It was hot and white, and all up the hillsides tangled trumpet vines wilted. The blacktop of the parking lot glistened so soft that it threatened to seep down the hillside. There was only the hint of a breeze, and it felt as forced and tired as the heavy-footed men who made their way out of the coal mine. The men laughed and called out their goodbyes. They climbed into their trucks, ground gears, and set out for home. They told Clay not to get too drunk this weekend, not to get into any fights when he was out honky-tonking. They loved it that every Monday he told them big stories about his barroom brawls and drunken women while the men leaned against the black walls of the earth and took their lunches. They all liked Clay. They called him Baby Boy since he was the youngest man on the crew, and all the miners had nicknames. They talked with cigarettes bobbing up and down in their mouths, feeling deep in their pockets for their keys. As Clay got into his truck, they all hollered out in sing-song voices, "Bye-bye, baby boy, be good this weekend." Clay wheeled his truck carefully down the steep incline of road that led to US 25. Once off the company road and onto the highway, he shifted gears and laid rubber on the road, his tires issuing little barks. He passed two of the men who had gotten out before him. He laughed into his rearview mirror at the miners behind him, gave them the finger, and smiled with his teeth blazing white against his coal-dusted face. He liked the way the gear shift felt, all cool and shiny, covered up in his hand. His big, rough palms slid over the steering wheel with ease as he sped down the road, shifting gears and pushing the gas all the way to the floor. He loved the rough purr of the engine and the smooth sound of tires humming sweetly on hot pavement. The road was long and curvy, making its way around jutting mountainsides where sandy cliffs dripped sulfur and parched gullies lay where creeks usually spilled down. Close to the company land, it was heavily wooded with straight white pines and hickories. As Clay passed houses, he could see into the yards where husbands and wives worked side by side in the dusty gardens, hoeing out the weeds that seemed to grow even more rampant in the heat. Boys leaned into the mouths of their vehicles, grease smeared up their arms and across their faces, their tools lying silver and shiny at their feet. Young wives swept the porch or sat in porch chairs breaking beans. At the Pentecostal church, the pastor was standing back to read the message he had just put on the large sign sitting on cinder blocks in the parking lot. It changed every Friday, and Clay loved to see what it would say each week. Today the sign read, "Man is born to trouble, sure as the sparks fly upward." Amen to that, Clay said aloud. The preacher always knew exactly what to say, as if he predicted Clay's moods and put the scriptures there just for him. He maneuvered the truck around the curves while his fingers tapped on the steering wheel. He sang along with the radio without missing a word and felt around on the seat until he found his cigarettes. The Zippo fired, and the scent of new smoke and lighter fluid came to him, filling his lungs with the sensation of something that would cleanse him instead of kill him. On one side of the road, the shoulder dropped off to a kudzu-covered slope that slid down into the river. In some places, the river was so shallow he could make out the small slate rocks on its bottom. The houses all set on the other side of the water with swinging bridges leading out to the shoulder of the road where the people parked their cars. In one of the shoals, a mother in a denim skirt and faded blouse held the hand of her little daughter. They walked in the river, passing under the blue shadows of willows. Their feet looked pink when they brought them out of the water to take a step. When the woman let go of the child's hand, the little girl fell heavily into the water. The woman laughed, bending over to look the child in the eye, and they started splashing each other. There was always something to remind Clay of his own mother, long dead. The valley widened out somewhat, and small businesses began to come into sight. He passed a green highway sign that read Black Banks just before he came up the last little hill and stopped at the red light where the highway became Main Street. There was a family-owned grocery store here, but a huge billboard on the mountain behind it told everyone to shop at the new supermarket in the shopping center. The new factory was out on the bypass now, and they were already building another lane on the highway that took travelers up to the Daniel Boone Parkway. A federal courthouse stood just up the street, and on the outskirts of town, rows of stores jutted from both sides of the Walmart. So I started that book in 1993 as a college student in math class, and I finished it about 5 years later. And along the way, I was just trying to take readers to the Appalachia that I was living in at the time. I'll be honest with you in that as a gay man, I sometimes feel like Appalachia doesn't love me as much as I love it. And that is the main thing that shows up in my writing. The older I get, the more I write about that. Too often I think in Appalachian studies, we don't want to admit the negative aspects of the region. But there's much good about it too. I now live in the city of Lexington, Kentucky, only about 45 minutes drive from what I think of as back home or Appalachia. But that 45 minutes might as well be 10 hours because where I'm from is a different world. I miss it all the time, even if I can't live there anymore due to economic and social issues. I stay homesick. I miss the way people talk to each other at the dentist office in the particular way they don't in the city. I miss the wide open, no holds barred mourning that happens at a funeral. They don't do that the same way in the city. I miss living on a country road where everyone is out on the porch in the evening this time of year, when it is that just right temperature of not hot but not cold either, when all the little live things in the trees and grasses are still singing. I miss being around old men who call young men honey the way they do where I'm from. I miss the land more than anything. The mist on the ridge in the morning, whippoorwills, the sound of a coal train's whistle in the distance, teenagers raising hell on four-wheelers. I miss the way my neighbors used to fight out in the backyard, and she would throw all of his clothes out the window at least once a week. I miss the extra care that the graveyards are given there. I miss the ones in my family who are already in those graveyards. I miss the stories and how present stories are in everyday life there. I miss the riverbanks that I grew up on. But most of all, I miss my people, most of whom I vehemently disagree with politically, religiously, just about in every way. But I always will love them despite that. I can't help but to love them. They are who I am from. I miss everything that is ugly about it and beautiful about it. And that's why I keep going back to it in my writing. So like I said, I started my first book in the fall of 1993, and it was published in the spring of 2001. It's almost 20 years old now. At the time the book came out, I was a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service. I was not a mail carrier that wore like a crisp uniform and all that. I didn't have one of those nice little Jeeps that you see on city routes. Rural carriers drive whatever they can, and they dress however they want to. And they tend to drive really the junkiest kind of vehicle they can drive because it gets banged up Like every time you open a mailbox, it just scrapes down the door of your car, etc. And also, all I could afford at that time was a really rusty 1984 Thunderbird, so that would have been about 20 years old. It sent out funnels of black smoke. It made it sound like a train approaching. I bought the car really cheap because it had been wrecked. The entire passenger side fender was caved in, so that sometimes I had to pull over and pull the fender out so that it wouldn't go against the wheel, the tire. The console in between, the passenger seat and driver's seat was huge. It was about the size of this, honestly. And so I had to drive in the passenger seat, put my leg over the console, and I'm driving this way from the steering wheel. And strangely enough, I felt more in control of the car from that side. And I haven't worked at the Postal Service for, about 15 years now, I guess. And sometimes I still go to the passenger side of the car to get in, because that ingrained in me. I tell you all this just to say that I can't think of a better job for a rider, because I got all day long, I got to listen to music and smoke cigarettes and drive and put the mail in the box. And I was in my early 20s, and listening to music and smoking and driving were like my three favorite things anyway. And so, all day long I was able to think about the book that I was writing and compose those entire scenes in my head. One of my routes was 80 miles long, and one day I finished the entire route with really no recollection of delivering my mail that day, because I had been so entrenched in a scene I was writing that day for what would become my first novel. But best of all, I really discovered things as a mail carrier. The main things I discovered are that people are really wonderful and people are really terrible, and I saw both sides of that on the mail route. Your mail carrier knows much more about you than you think that he or she does. They know that not only because of the kind of mail that they might be delivering to you, but what they're observing every day for years. I could go on and on with stories I have from those 7 years I worked as a mail carrier. I had a gun pulled on me twice. Once, when I pulled up to a house to deliver a parcel, a man came out onto the porch to sign for it wearing nothing but a pair of snakeskin boots. Another time, two little boys put a black snake in a mailbox to scare me, and so when I opened it, the snake jumped out, and their plan worked because it did scare me. They heard a string of expletives that they probably remember. They were hiding in the ditch to watch me. But the people on my route gave me stories, sometimes by just what they did in everyday life, but sometimes they told me things. A woman who was ecstatic to finally receive her divorce papers by certified letter, I had to go and she had to sign for them. She told me everything about the horrible divorce, horrible marriage she had been trapped in. And she probably doesn't know that she shows up in Clay's Quilt, my first novel, because there's a woman that's going through an abusive relationship in that novel. And that woman really gave me a lot of great information. A man who lived on my route stood by his mailbox every single day for a month waiting for me and hoping that I was delivering news that his disability had finally been approved. He was seeking disability for black lung disease, which is something that coal miners often get. And so he would often tell me about his life in the coal mines. And the main character is a coal miner. So he shows up in the book too in lots of ways. And he died just a few months after receiving his disability check. Because I wrote all day long in my head while I delivered that mail, when I got home, I would play with my children, who were very small at the time. I did the regular work of living when you're not wealthy, like mowing the yard, cleaning the house, working on my car. By the time everything was done and the children were asleep, I was worn out, but I really wanted to write that book. And so I sacrificed sleep, which I'm sure many of you do as college students. And sometimes I would be up to 1 or 2 in the morning, even though I had to be on the post office floor by 6:30 in the morning. But I got the book written. And then the book came out, and nobody was more surprised than me when it became a New York Times bestseller. 8 months after it was published, I was able to quit my job as a mail carrier and become a full-time writer for several years. That was a very happy day for me because carrying the mail is really hard. So be thankful for your mail carriers. They do so much behind the scenes that we don't even think about. I also was surprised to find that as an Appalachian writer, I have a special responsibility when I go on the road that not all writers have. When most writers go on book tour, they get to talk about their books. When Appalachian writers go on book tour, we are trying our best to talk about our books, but mostly audiences want to talk about Appalachia because they don't get it, they don't understand it, and they think they want to understand it better. I try to answer their questions the best I can, but mostly what I have to say about the place is contained in my books. That's why I write them. And I want people to go there for my perspectives. But I'm also glad to be a part of that conversation, and it's an endless one. Since that first book was published, I've published 5 more novels, 1 book of nonfiction, and 3 plays. So I've tried to stay busy, and I've tried to continue to show Appalachia as a complex place. That's my main goal as a writer. I want to show it as a complicated place. I don't want to romanticize it any more than I want to vilify it. I think both of those things are simplifying. I just want to tell the truth, my own truth, as I know it. So I hope I'm speaking now to the emerging writers out there and up here, and I'll just say that that this place needs more people to tell its story in a complex way. When my first book came out, Appalachia needed a Generation X voice, and Generation Z, which is an even more maudlin title than being called Generation X, I guess. Sort of a gloomy title to have bestowed upon you. My point is that Generation Z Appalachia needs its stories told too, so I'm really glad y'all are already doing that, and some of you out there as well are doing that, I'm sure. So I'm glad to be a part of this tonight. Thank y'all for being here.
Oh, once more, thank y'all for coming out tonight. Please stay for the reception, and let's get another round of applause for all the speakers. I would also like to extend my gratitude and AppSpeak's gratitude to the Department of Communications, Department of English, Campus Activities, and Apps for making this all possible. But if you enjoyed the content of all these talks as much as I have, feel free to talk to them during the reception while you get food, ask them about their writings, give them job offers, chat about your weekend. Just enjoy it. Thank you all for coming out.
Have you ever heard of the online journal Feel?
Yeah.